video, I'm going to talk about how I blend in the context of still life painting using oil paint. And it goes without saying that there are lots of ways to paint and blend, and everyone at the end, I think, comes up with their own way, really. And there's lots of good ways to do it, and this is just my take on it. So I like to pre-mix some of these colors before I start to paint, and for that I use a palette knife. These are some of the ones I've used before. These are Holbein. I think this is, when I bought it anyway, was the top line of Holbein, and it's fantastic. What you want in a palette knife is flexibility, and I think a curve in the handle is very nice too, because when you're mixing, you won't get your knuckles in your paint. It's nice, you know, it's versatile. Anyway, these are the best, in my opinion. And this Holbein, I think this is a different series of Holbein, maybe not quite as expensive, but that was great too. I think this was somewhere around $40 when I bought it in the 90s. This one I bought pretty recently at a local, maybe Michael's or AC Moore, and it's pretty good. It was maybe $5, and I use it a lot, and it's, for the price, I think it's pretty great. This is another style of painting knife that I would not recommend, or a palette knife that I would not recommend, because they're not very flexible. It's hard, you know, this plastic, you can't get a very good swipe. You know, in a palette knife, you want to be able to make a swipe and pick up all your paint again. In this, anyway, these are best avoided. Even though they're cheap, they're probably between $1 and $3. It's not really worth the money, in my opinion. So for this first stage of the painting, I've mixed some colors to represent most of the range of the value on the painting. I like to have some for the darks, mid-tone, and light, and I'm making this warmer color here for the blush on the pears. And one of the advantages of mixing your colors out ahead of time is you can see what you have. Like if you just start putting some color on the canvas, you have no context for that, and color is really experienced through the context of the colors around it, the color and value around it. So by pre-mixing some of these color value combinations, I can get a clearer sense of what they are really going to look like when they're on the canvas. I like to have, you know, some decent jumps in value. For my paintings, they do have a large value range. I know some people like to paint in a closer value range, and you know, there's no right or wrong. It's just whatever your interests are. And for each shift in value, there's generally a shift in color also. Like it's very rare that, you know, the next lighter color on a form is just that with white. I mean, it can be, but it's usually, you know, warmer or cooler, more red, more, you know, whatever. But when I'm making these mixtures, I'm looking at the still life setup and trying to decide, you know, like from this, it's fairly warm. This is the mid-tone, and it's fairly warm. And when it jumped to the lighter value, it's more of a bluish green. It's lighter but also more blue, and this one I think was, you know, more blue still. But I'm trying to see how they compare to each other, and as I mix them. And so by setting them down together, I can really see how much the value jumps and how the color shifts within the context of each other. So for the pear, I'm going to mix up a couple of tones for the background in the foreground, and these are what I'm going to lay in to the pear, and I'm going to start that next. So now my block-in stage is the beginning of that is finished. I have something covering all of the canvas. It's an approximation of the color and value. Until this point, I generally don't blend, but at this point, I would consider starting some of the areas I have on there, and I'll talk about that next. So these are the sorts of brushes I use for blending, and I have many different sizes of each of these kinds. This is a Isby 6159. This is a filbert, and this is a round. This is a Princeton Velvet Touch Greener. I think that's a filbert too, and this is very similar. That's a Rosemary & Co. Comber, they call it, and this is Princeton. I think this is a student line, but Princeton Select Filbert Greener, and they all are very kind of jagged at the tip. I think they maybe cut away some of the bristles, or maybe just set them in there so that it's very open at the tip. It won't make any kind of a blocky mark, but it's, you know, like it's a feathery kind of mark that it'll make, and I find those helpful for blending. Especially this Rosemary & Co. I love it because it's very narrow, so you can use it going one way as like a very fine liner, and the other way you can blend small areas. I find it very useful to have small blenders for the small areas, because I really only like to blend one area into the area next to it, not really any big large overall blending. So the small ones are especially helpful. I do use some of these bigger mops for maybe like the background. This is a Low Cornell Maxine's mop, and this has been my best mop so far. It doesn't shed, which is a very common problem with mop brushes. I have some that just are no good at all because they shed so much, but that's been pretty good. And this one is new. This is the Rosemary & Co. Monday mop. This one, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty good one too. And sometimes I use a synthetic round brush that's probably had a point at a long time in the past. It had a point, but now it's kind of sticking out, but that can be good for blending too. Okay, so I finished my block in, so now I'm ready to do some blending. And this is just my first pass. I'm going to basically do this all again once it's dry, and fine-tune everything, and fix some of the relationships. Like, for example, I think that this looks now like it needs another value in between, or it's too big of a jump. Like, there's a lot of little things that are going to need to be adjusted once I go into my next pass. I'm going to soften it into what's next to it. You know, that'll soften to that, and that to that. When I was painting this, I mixed a little bit of medium into it, and it had linseed oil, a little bit of stand oil, and some Gamsol. And while I was putting all this in, a lot of the Gamsol has evaporated off, and now it's a little bit more dense. It wants to stay put. Like when I'm blending, I don't want the paint to be very runny or too liquidy. I'm going to start with the Isby and just kind of go crisscross back and forth, and it'll blend pretty easily, pretty nicely. And you know, one of the good things about having the paint a little bit set up is you don't want to take it off. Sometimes if the paint is too runny and you go over it with a brush, it's going to come up, and you don't want that. I want it to stay put. It's thin enough to kind of stay put, but it's not too transparent, because it's very hard to tell what your values are if it's too transparent, because you'll be getting a lot of the white from underneath, and it can be very hard to see what you have that way. So I'm going to do this first. See, it kind of blends the two together. See, this value being darker, I want the darker value to stay down low. I don't want to get this value up here, right? I just want it to be a slow gradation from the dark here up gradually towards light. So in between, if I need to go up here again to blend, I'm gonna clean the brush off on a paper towel. I would never, don't under any circumstances dip your paint into any kind of solvent, dip your brush into any kind of solvent right now, because if you put that onto the painting, it's going to dissolve it and it's going to run, and it'll really be a mess. Also, while I'm blending, I'm also kind of flattening out the some of the paint. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because I'm going to be going over this with another coat when it dries. Okay, so now I'm going to blend on the pear, and I only want to blend an area with the area that's next to it. So in between, I'll brush the paint off to clean it, and you definitely want to soften this line. It's a little bit too, well, it's a lot too harsh, really. So I'm going to let this dry for maybe a couple of days, and then when I come in on the next pass, I'm going to make a lot of adjustments in value and in color. I want to adjust some of the color relationships, darken some of the darks, lighten the lights, things like that, fine tune it, and so I'll try to get that together soon.